as a team? Where do you stand on his role at Stamford Bridge?
Well, it's sort of the fundamental question of modern tactics since Guardiola started playing false nines is a centre forward worth the trade-off? And in Lukaku's case, I would argue that he's actually been played out of position for most of his career. Because just the sneaky thing about Romelu Lukaku, even though he looks for all the world like a big burly target man, is he's actually really effective when he's running at defenders and running at goal. And still his best match for Belgium came against Brazil, in my opinion, in the quarterfinals of the 2018 World Cup, where he was played sort of on the right-hand side of a front three.
And
cutting in, but mostly just in more open spaces and dribbling.
Yeah.
And that's why he's always so devastating, and Belgium, by extension, are so devastating on the counter-attack. When, they've got a player like Dries Mertens, who has always killed it at club level, especially for Napoli. His best years were in a false nine role for Napoli. But he's always relegated to the wing for Belgium and is never quite as effective.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered, why don't they just switch those two players? And I think that'd be an infinitely better side. But I guess it takes a brave manager to turn to Romelu Lukaku, who scored so many goals in his career, and say, you're playing on the wing.
Yeah.
That's what I think Thomas Tuchel should do, though. I really do. In this front three, I don't think he should necessarily be competing for the central striker role, but rather for the inside right forward with, the likes of Ziyech and so forth, because I think he offers a lot in that position. And although, the knock on him at United was always his first touch, Conte worked with him a lot at Inter on that. He has improved in that regard with balls to feet, but he's still better facing goal. And that's why he worked well in a two-striker system that was primarily counter-attacking at Inter. And that's why at Chelsea, I think he's sometimes limits their play and makes them a little bit one-dimensional. So I reckon there's a way to incorporate him to maximise his strengths and also the team.
So talk people through the success at Inter then. You talked about that two-striker system. What did that look like in terms of where he was positionally on the pitch that allowed him to run at defences?
So when you're playing with one centre forward, they kind of have to stay in the one spot a lot of the time because they have to be a focal point, because you always need somebody who can be in the box to finish in the 6-yard box. So if your starting position is too deep, then you end up crossing the ball across the face of goal and no one's there to finish it.
Yep.
And you also need somebody who's playing on the last man to push the opposition defense backwards and give them a reason not to play so high that they constrict your midfield play.
Yeah.
So if you're playing with two centre forwards, as he did with Martinez primarily at Inter, you can always have one dropping short and one stretching the defence and running in behind.
Yeah.
And that worked really well because Lukaku was able to do a little bit of everything. He just didn't have to just play target man. He could also run off the shoulder. He could also drop deep, pick up the ball, turn and dribble. And Antonio Conte, there's stories of him just firing balls like himself, not just with the coaching staff, but him just kicking balls at Lukaku and getting him to control them, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty low-tech way to,
I mean, it
improve
worked.
your first touch, but it seems to have worked. And he's also... he also, I think, at Inter cut a little bit of weight and like a bit of muscle because I think he just put on too much muscle at United.
Yeah.
And
big boy.
Yeah, he was a big lad, and I don't think that helped his mobility. Sometimes players can go too far with that.
Yeah. You know all about that, right?
Yeah, of course. I just that's why I don't go to the gym ever, because I just don't want to impede my mobility.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I get caught on doorways.
It's tough. And so what then? At Chelsea, what do you think that optimum front three would look like for Thomas Tuchel, and does Lukaku have a role in that?
It's difficult because they're also kind of interchangeable. For me, I still don't think the best front three contains Timo Werner because he's just unreliable.
Interestingly, though, I did a poll after the episode with Q, and I said Lukaku or Werner, and Werner got about 80% of the votes.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, he's been playing well recently, but I still don't trust him in big games. I just think he's a bit flaky.
Yeah.
For me, it would be Lukaku on the right, Havertz as the sort of false nine.
Yes.
Because I think that's his best position, because he's got the first touch and the skill to be able to incorporate players with his back to goal. And then the left inside forward position could be anyone, really. Probably Mason Mount, actually.
Yeah.
I think he's been playing really well under Tuchel since he took over, because his off-the-ball movement is so good. And then once Havertz drops in, it essentially becomes two strikers because Mount is always running in behind as well.
Yeah.
He's always stretching defenses with those off the ball runs. So
Yeah.
it essentially becomes a 3-4-1-2 once the central striker becomes the false nine, if you know what I mean. It kind
Yes, it comes
kind of
into the-
flips. The
Yeah.
front three flips. So that's probably what it would look like for me. But they've got a lot of good players competing for those positions in
Yeah.
Hudson-Odoi and Pulisic and Ziyech and Werner. And like there's a lot of options. And I think that's part of the problem for Chelsea at the moment is they don't quite know what the best team is. And the other thing is they are a little bit more cautious than Man City and Liverpool in their play. They don't usually risk as much. Yes, they've racked up scorelines against bottom teams, but in the big games, they usually play a little bit more conservatively. And you look at things like XG tables, they're actually below City and Liverpool, despite their hot start to the season. And now we're seeing that reflected in the table finally. So I wonder if that's catching up to them a little bit. They tend to concede more shots than City and Liverpool because they play a little bit deeper with their defensive line, and that invites a little bit more pressure.
Yeah.
Then again, the trade-off for City and Liverpool, who play such high-octane, high lines, is when they do concede chances, they tend to be really high-quality chances because it's when everything breaks down, someone gets in behind. But their goalkeepers barely face any shots. So there's your trade-off, and that's the two schools of thought, I suppose, and that's where the title will be won and lost.
Excuse me. And I think the point of having an abundance of talent and abundance of choice also doesn't help. I watched Frank Lampard's interview with Gary Neville on The Overlap, and he talked about when they were bringing all this talent in and how to balance it and negotiate that.